نبينا وحبيبنا ووسيلتنا إلى رب العالمين محمد بن عبد الله سيد المرسلين وختم الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. فقد نوينا تعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه والدعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على خير وكل ما نواه مشايخنا ابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Alhamdulillah, just before we get started, alhamdulillah, there's a lot of space, so just for the sake of the regulations, let's try to spread out a bit. There's some really nifty blue things on the ground on this side, but there's nothing here.
Just make sure you're 2 meters away from your neighbor.
MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. So in our first class on Matn Al-Ajurrumiyya in Arabic grammar, today we're going to focus mainly on the opening discussions and then take a dip in the ocean of the science of Nahw, and we'll start into the book itself. We will start today, inshallah, into the text itself. Does anyone actually have the text? Okay. So there's some versions floating around PDF as well. There's some that you can purchase. And I think there's some people in this building that may be experts in selling in books that you can ask. Like Sayyidina Shibli is here for those books. There are some English translation books, but only if necessary. Right? And they say, Al-Dururat tataqaddaru biqadriha. In fiqh, we have a principle that necessities are fulfilled only to the need of the necessity. No further than that. So if you don't need the English, we're going to try to force ourselves out of the comfort zone to get ourselves used to Arabic words, Arabic terminologies. Right? We'll try to translate during the class, but to memorize the actual Arabic terminology is really important. And even though the English may be helpful in the meantime, it may be a crutch later on that if we don't focus on the Arabic terminologies as well. So in the first class, we're just going to do an introduction to the science itself and a little bit about the author before we enter in the last part of the class into the opening lines of the text. And then we want to save some time in the end to add a cherry on top, some dessert for the soul, inshallah, from one of the great and most ajib, meaning unique scholars of Islam, Ibn Ahmad ibn Ajiba, inshallah ta'ala. So when we talk about Arabic grammar, the science of Nahw, the word Nahw itself could take a whole class, right, to explain. There's multiple meanings for the word Nahw. We're not going to go into that. I remember having a class in Arabic grammar. It was a 4th year class. It was a very high level book called Hidayatun Nahw. And the first class was all about, right, the difference between this scholar and this scholar about what's the root word of noun. Right? Like, where does the word come from? We don't need to go into that. Right? Those are theoretical concepts that are beneficial, right, later on, but right now we're going to stick to the core. Right? We want to really just make what they call dabt, to really get down the basic rules, right? And then what we want to encourage is that in one's own diligence and one's own time to really work on one's vocabulary. Right? Because if you want to arrange the priority of Arabic, it depends on what you want. Right? And normally what we would do is that we would have everyone write it down, right, what exactly they want to get out of this class. And it's good to do, but we won't do that for the sake of time. Right? But think in one's head, what do we want to get out of this? Right? Because right, if one wants to access the Qur'an and the Hadith and to understand them in their original text, that's one thing. If one wants to speak Arabic, that's a whole different ball game. Right? There is some overlap on both of them, right? But in some points they're different. They're different styles, not necessarily of study, but different styles of implementation. And what you're going to focus on may be slightly different. So if you want to speak, there's no doubt whatsoever that the most important thing to do to speak Arabic is to have vocabulary. You can know all the rules under the sun, right? But if you don't have vocabulary, you won't be able to even ask for, right, 1 kilo of potatoes. Right? You won't be able to, because you won't have the words for it. Right? Right. So, right, we should all, right, we'll talk about what are the purposes behind, the higher purposes behind learning Nahw, and definitely the highest of purposes is to be able to understand the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, and the guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And even though we have, right, we have translations, we have tafsirs, even tafsir of Qur'an is translated, right? You have translations of Riyadh al-Salihin, for books of hadith are translated, right? But anyone who knows Arabic, even to a basic level, right, they will testify to the fact that the English does not do its surface. And what you will get out of just reading the Qur'an without a tafsir, right, and having a background knowledge of Arabic, even to a basic extent, will be far greater than anyone who reads it by translation. Right, so Arabic grammar, Nahw, right, is one of the sciences that are under the scope of Arabic. Right? So the Arabic language breaks up into multiple sciences. Right? One of them is grammar. Right? And Arabic is unique insofar as that it has, right, compartmentalized subjects under one thing. Right? So we have a whole subject called morphology, whereas other languages it's not so important. It's kind of inside the grammar itself. Right? But we're going to focus on the Nahw, and maybe during the class we'll give some isharats, some indications toward the morphology as well, and some tips on how to build one's vocabulary. Right? So the legal definition, meaning not the linguistic definition. Linguistically, Nahw has multiple meanings. It could mean to resemble something. Right? Zaydun Nahw Asad. Zayd is like a lion. Right? It's like the kaf, a ka. Right? It could also mean a direction. Right? Imshi Nahw al-Madina. Right? Walk toward the city. Right? And there's many other meanings as well. Right? But the legal definition, the definition that pertains to us, is, right, knowledge of certain principles through which the rulings of the endings of Arabic words are known. Right, so the grammar of Arabic shows up on the endings of all the words. Now one may be amazed if they see somebody reading with no vowels. Right? It's quite an amazing thing. Right? The first time I saw it, I was amazed as well. Right? But one may wonder, how do you even do that? Right? Because most of us grew up learning how to read the Qur'an that already has all the vowels. Right? Right? So how do you read without the vowels? You know the principles. If you know the principles, you know that this word has to have a dhamma and nothing else. This word has to have a kasra and nothing else. This word has to have a fatha and nothing else. Right? And then after that, right, within that are the meanings. Right? And then after that, the only thing that's stopping us from truly understanding it is the vocab. Right? If we know the words, right, then we have the complete puzzle. Right? So generally, before you start at any topic, there are 10 discussions, right? 10 things that you would discuss, called the Mabadi al-Ashar, the 10 principles of that science. Right? We're going to focus on these 6 because the other 4, that could take a lot of time to go through. Right? So the first is the definition. Right? Here is the subject matter. What does this science discuss? What is the subject of this science? And they say that the virtue of the science is according to its subject matter. And this is why there's a huge debate between the scholars of Qur'an and the scholars of Aqidah. Right? Because the scholars of Qur'an saying that Our subject matter is the word of Allah. Right, so the theologians, they would say that our subject matter is Allah Himself. Right, but here we're talking about Arabic words and the states of those words. Right, what are their states? Right, so if somebody asks you, right, what is the Arabic grammar of see spot run? You would tell them that that has nothing to do with Arabic grammar because it's not part of the subject matter, because it's not Arabic. Arabic words, it's our focus, and that's it. Right? The benefit of this, right, there are multiple benefits. There are spiritual benefits as well to learning Arabic. But generally, they mention that it's to protect the tongue from making mistakes in Arabic speech. Right? And it imparts a sound understanding of the Qur'an and the Hadith. Many of the misinterpretations stem from just a bad foundation of Arabic. Right? And I've seen disasters in translations, disasters in understandings because of one fatha. One fatha. Right? The difference between anza and anaza is the difference between a stick and a goat. Right? It's a very big difference. Right? And one of them is in a hadith, and the other, right? And one of them is what's meant in the hadith. Just for one example, right? The nisbah, the affiliation of this science, that Arabic, Nahw, we'll use the term Nahw instead. It belongs to a broader discipline of Arabic sciences. Right? So you have Nahw, you have, along with that, you have Sarf, morphology, you have what's called fiqh al-lugha, which is not as well known. Right? The roots, the science of the word roots, right, and their usages. You have other sciences that relate to it, like balagha, right, which would be like Arabic eloquence. Right? Poetry would also fall under the category of Arabic sciences. But these sciences, as we mentioned, are what they're called al-ulum al-ala. Al-ulum al-ala. Ulum meaning sciences, ala meaning instrumental. They're instrumental sciences, meaning that they are not sought in and of themselves. That they are merely a tool or an instrument by which you can attain other sciences. So you have the ulum al-ala, the instrumental sciences, and the ulum al-aliyah, the lofty sciences. So the lofty sciences are like Qur'an, and the sciences that relate to the Qur'an, the Hadith, and the sciences that relate to the Hadith, right? Jurisprudence, theology, and so forth. Right? How do you get to those? Right? You need the instrumental sciences, and even to access even the basic books of those sciences at a deep level. Right? So this is from the instrumental sciences, right? The ulum al-ala. Now the founder of this science, I just got done reading literally like a page after page after page of the difference of opinion of who started this science. Right? Anything that's this old, right, a science like Arabic, or even the language of Arabic, you're going to find things like that. Who started it? Right? I remember once being in the masjid, and there was almost a fight because one Egyptian man, he was very avid and very passionate that the Egyptians created falafel. Whereas another person in the masjid, Palestinian brother, he had a difference of opinion, let's say. Right? So anything that is as old as falafel, or even older like Arabic language, you're going to have things like that. Right? Does it matter? It does, to some extent, but it's not really the purpose of us studying. Right? We're not historians, we're studying Arabic. Right? But the most famous, and it seems to be the strongest of the opinions amongst the scholars, is that it was founded insofar as that it's an actual codified science by a man from the Tabi'een named Abu Aswad ad-Duwali. Abu Aswad ad-Duwali. Now, Abu Aswad ad-Duwali, right, as the story goes, he heard his daughter say a sentence. Right? She said, "Ma ashaddul har." Right? I'll just translate the words. Ma, right? The sentence that she actually said is, "What is the hottest thing? What is the hottest? What thing is the hottest?" Right? So her father, Abu al-Aswad, he said, Al-Hasba bir-Ramda, right? Rocks beneath the midday sun. Right? That's the hottest thing. Right? So the daughter, she looked at him like he's, she didn't get it. She was amazed. She said that إِنَّمَا تَعَجَّبْتُ مِنْ شِدَّتِهِ. It's like, no, I was just expressing my amazement at its heat. I wasn't asking a question. Right? So the father said, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." Right? Because, right, if you're expressing an expression, if you're making an expression of amazement in Arabic, you would say "Ma ashaddal har" with a fatha. "Ma ashaddul har" is a question. "Ma ashaddal har" means how hot is it? Wow, it's so hot. Right? So he saw that as just a calamity, right? Because the Arabs, and there are situations where Sayyidina Umar, he met people and they were practicing their archery. Right? And then, so he asked them a question and then they responded in bad grammar. And he said that the only thing worse than your archery is your language, right? Is your grammar. So the Arabs were very passionate in preserving the Arabic because, right, in it is preservation of revelation. Right? And at that time there was no vowels. There was no diacritical marks, right? That came later. They didn't need it because they all spoke with grammar. Right? So Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, he saw that this had become something of a problem, and he told Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, who told him to codify some sort of method or of a scientific way of learning proper grammar. Right? In some narrations, that say that Ali told him to start with that speech is of three types: noun, verbs, and particles. He said start with that and you continue the rest. Right? So Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, he did so, and he went on to codify the science in a very basic way. Later on, it started to be expanded with more details and more examples, and many works were authored even in the very early days. Right? So you have the likes of Sibawayh and right, Ibn Hormuz and others. So next is, what is the ruling of learning Arabic? Okay. So learning Arabic, like many of the other instrumental sciences, is a communal obligation that somebody has to do it, right? Because in it is preservation of the Qur'an. Right? And preservation of the Qur'an is an obligation on the community insofar as that if one person does it or some people do it, then the responsibility falls off the shoulders of the others. And it's important to understand that the Qur'an is preserved not only in its language and its wording, but also in its meaning. Right? And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that take in the famous verse where He declares His role in preservation of the Qur'an, that inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun, that we are the ones who sent down the dhikr, the reminder, right? And we are the ones who will protect it. Right? He didn't use the word Qur'an or kitab, the book. He used the word dhikr, reminder. Now the word dhikr, it contains both the meaning and the wording. Right? That's why when Allah says, ask the people of knowledge, He says, ask the people of dhikr, right? If you do not know. Because they not only know the letter of the law, but they know the spirit of the law as well. Right? So somebody has to do it. Right? Somebody has to do it. Right? If no one does it, then everyone is sinful. Right? So there's got to be somebody in every community who knows, right, the Arabic language insofar as they can understand the Qur'an in a proper way. Right? The specific text that we're going to be using is called Al-Ajurrumiyya. Al-Ajurrumiyya. Right? It's a primer in Arabic grammar, but if a person can master this book, right, it will prove as a very strong foundation for them when they move on to the next books, right, into the more detailed books. Right? And I've seen many people in their study of Arabic have the kind of the grass is greener on the other side approach, right? And not make it through the text. And this is countless examples of this. Right? Arabic needs patience. It needs patience and discipline in order to learn it. If one has both of those, it won't take long. It will not take long. You don't need 5 years to learn Arabic. You will continue to learn Arabic your whole life, but to learn it at a level that you have a proficiency in reading the Qur'an or reading any Arabic texts with a good amount of understanding, at least, you don't need 5 years. Right? 1 or 2 solid years would be extremely beneficial and very fruitful. Right? A friend of mine was asked, what is the best Arabic curriculum? A famous question, right? Which school has this curriculum, no, they study this way and this style. Right? His answer was very simple, the one you finish. That's it, right? And the reason why that's so profound is because the Arabic language, it's all, technically, because of its vastness, there's really no way around it, it's all over the place. There are things in the last chapter that would have been nice to know in the first chapter. Right? And there are things in the first chapter that you don't really need to know until the last chapter. Right? And so it all goes together. It's like a puzzle. Right? Which part is the most important? Right? They're all necessary. Right? But there's no way to have a book if you're not going to start somewhere. So you have to have a beginning, but you need to finish that text, because otherwise there'll be holes everywhere, and one will be confused. But just bearing it through, there's so much fruit in that. Right? And striving through it, once you get to the end of the book, it's like a light goes off. Oh, that's what that meant. Right? So the author of this work, and this work being one of the most famous in almost every curriculum of Arabic that you will find, with small exceptions, different styles, right? You'll find that this book is there. Right? Either in its prose form or its poetry form. There's a poem that was written on this as well. Right? So the author his name is Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Dawood al-Sanhaji. Abu Abdullah is his kunya, right? The father of Abdullah. His son's name is Abdullah, but his name is Muhammad bin Dawood al-Sanhaji. But he's known as Ajurrum. Ajurrum. That's why it's called Al-Ajurrumiyya, or Al-Ajurrumiyya. Right? And he is born in the year of 276, right, after Hijrah. So he's within the first 3 generations, or the first 3 centuries. He passed away in 327. Who's the math genius here? Anyone? How old is he? 327 minus 276? 51. 51 years old. Rahimahullahu ta'ala. Right? And it's important to any book that you study to always make dua for the author. Right? Because even though they have passed away almost over 1,000 years ago, right, they are still the means by which we are drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by which we are learning these sacred sciences. So the text itself is not very big. Right? It's quite small. We will expand where we need to, but we want to focus on getting the core principles down and knowing them like the back of your hand, right? Knowing them like Surah Fatiha. Right? And we find that throughout the tradition there are people who had hard times with Arabic, but because of their sincerity and their hard work, Allah opened it up for them. One of the great Indian scholars, he just couldn't get it. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't get the Arabic. So what he would do is he would go out to the back of his farmhouse. Right? He had some goats back there, and he would grab the goat by the ears and he would say, "Kullu fa'ilin marfu'un wa kullu maf'ulin mansubun," that right, all of the doer, right, the fa'il is, right, they have marfu'. We'll talk about what they mean. Right? And all the objects are mansub. And then he would say, "Do you understand?" And he would let go. And then the goat would say like this, go like this. So then he would do it again. And then one of the nights he saw a dream, and the Prophet ﷺ took some of his saliva and put it in his mouth, and he became one of the greatest of the grammarians, right? So sometimes, right, so there's an aspect of the study that has to do with our own diligence, our own efforts. But there's another aspect that is gifted. And the second aspect of the study cannot be achieved without the first. Right, so entering into the book, right, he says, قال المصنف, the author said. The author says, right, or said. الكلام هو اللفظ المركب المفيد بالوضع. That speech is the compound utterance which is of benefit and is established in the Arabic language. Right, so we talked about that our subject matter is speech, Arabic speech, right, Arabic words and sentences. Right, so speech, he says, it is an utterance. That speech is an utterance. Right, what is that? What does that leave off? Right, anything else that we use to indicate to speech, but it's not actually an utterance. Right, so you can kick out from this definition text messages. Right, it's not an utterance. You can't, right? That's not an utterance, right? Even though we use these things, right? The thumbs up, all of that is not a statement, so it's not what we're talking about. That's not speech. Right? Some of this is obvious, but it's important. Tamam. Right? So it's a sound. Right? In other books, they explain more detail that, right, anything that comes out of the mouth, right, any sound that comes out of the mouth either has meaning or no meaning. Like either it's a sneeze, right, or a cry, or it's, right, Shakespeare, right, one or the other. Right, so we're talking about this one, not the first. So he says that it's compound, meaning that it's, right, it's made up of words. It's made up of words. Right, either, right, two words or more. Two or more words. Right, now, could you have a sentence with only one word? Anyone? What's the example? Sorry? That's technically, that's a good answer, but the pronoun is still a second word. There's some in verbs in Arabic, they have pronouns within them. So technically that's two words. Yaf'alu is he did. It's two words.
If you're replying, it's a yes.
Yeah, so na'am. That's a good answer. Right? But that is what we would call effectively more than one word. So if I said, is it hot today? And you said yes. Effectively what you said is, yes, it is hot. Right? So that counts. That counts. Right? So in Arabic, right, either it's you actually have two or more words, or you have one word with an opposed, right, but the meaning is indicated to by the context. Right? So, for instance, if I said, "Who is your brother?" You said Muhammad. Right? What's indicated there is that you said a full sentence. Muhammad is my brother, but the rest is not. It's not needed. But so that would still fall under the definition. Good. Right? But it says al-mufid. Right? That it gives benefit, which is of benefit. Right? So you could have an utterance that is made up of multiple words but doesn't benefit. Right? Right? So that would not be considered what we are talking about as speech itself. Right? So you could say, for instance, the red car. The red car. Right? Is there any benefit to that? Right, so the definition they give for benefit for this definition, and definitions are important because they're supposed to be jami' mani'. They're supposed to include in it everything that's supposed to be there and exclude from it everything that's not. If it's a good definition, it will include everything that's part of it and exclude everything else. That's why defining something, you're putting limits around it. Right, so when they mean beneficial, right, it means that if I were to say it to you, you will not be waiting for anything else. Right? That whatever I said, it's sufficient enough for me to be silent, and you're not awaiting me to continue. Right? If I said the big car, you would be like, what about the big car? Right? It hasn't served its benefit, But if I said the car is big and then I walked away, right, there is benefits, right? There's no need for more explanation. Right, so, and you can find this in many different ways, like when the teacher comes, then what, right? You're expecting something else. So that would not be kalam mufid. Right? That would be part of a kalam, that would be part of speech. Right? It may play a part in a full sentence, but it itself is not, right, full speech. And then the last one, it has to be in Arabic. It has to be something that's established in the Arabic language. Right? So anything that is of other language is not our discussion here. Right? So you can ask the scholars of grammar in those languages, and they'll tell you whether it's beneficial or not, or a sentence or not. Right? Right? So those are, and then he says that speech is of three types. Speech is three types. Right? There's ism, which is noun. Now ism is a term in Arabic language, which is known as noun. Right? But the word ism itself literally means name. Right? So, but in the terminology of Arabic grammar, right, we use it as noun. Even though in English, one part of a noun would be a name of a person, place, or thing. Right? But nouns. Right? Fi'al, linguistically, is an occurrence. Anything that occurs is an action, is a verb, right? Or is an action, right? An occurrence. But in the terminology that we're discussing, it means verb, right? The verb. And then finally, the harf. Harf in linguistically means the side of something. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ. There are people who worship Allah on a harf. Right? They are on the brink of something. That if something good happens to them, then they're strong. If something bad happens to them, they turn back on their heels and run away. Right? They're shaky. Right? But here we use harf to mean, right? Harf also means a letter. It's the word that we use for letter. Right? The plural is huruf. Right? But here we're talking about particles. Right? And how to distinguish them is what we'll be talking about next. So this is basically what Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib gave to Abu al-Aswad al-Duali, right? That ism fi al-harf, and he did the rest from there. Right? In some narrations he actually explained what they are, that the ism, right, is al-musamma. Right? The noun is that which something is named by. Right? So anything that has a name is a noun. Right? وَالْفِعْلُ حَرَكَ al-musamma, and the verb is the doing of that named thing. Right? And harf is a meaning that is in between the two, that fills in the gaps between the two. Right? So he gave a very basic definition, which Abu al-Aswad took and expounded on. Right? So the whole science of Arabic is on these three things. You'll never find anything in the Qur'an or the Hadith or any book of Arabic language that is not one of these three things. Right? And by mastering the definitions of what a noun is and so forth, right, and what are its signs, you'll be able to pick out every single line, every single word in the Qur'an. You'll be able to say that's a noun, verb, harf, noun, verb, harf. Right? When I first learned Qur'an, I didn't even know where one word stopped and what next word started. It just looked like scribble to me. Right? But after a while, it becomes clear. Right? So before we go into the signs of a noun, let's define the noun first. Right? The technical definition of a noun is a word that indicates to a meaning, to an intrinsic meaning. Right? A meaning in and of itself, and is not, and does not have anything to do with time. Right? So if I said house, or in Arabic, al-bayt, right? That word by itself is sufficient to give some meaning, that you have some picture in your mind of what I'm talking about, even if it be abstract. Like I said, science. Right? You have a general understanding of that word, and it has nothing to do with time. Right? You wouldn't say, the tree, when? Yesterday? No. You wouldn't ask anything to do with time. The verb again, has an intrinsic meaning. It has a meaning. It's a word that gives its own meaning, right? Its own intrinsic meaning, right? And it is attached to one of the three tenses. And we'll talk about why there's three. Some scholars added a fourth category. Others just combine the third and fourth into one. We'll talk about that. Right? And the harf, the particle, you can translate it as, but it's better to keep it in the Arabic terms from the beginning, so it would be easier. The harf is a word that does not intrinsically indicate to any specific meaning in and of itself. Right? Rather, its benefit is only produced when it is joined with the other two types. So if I just came in the room and I said fi, in, ala, on, right? You would just think that I'm loco, right, and send me on my way, right? Right? Because it has no benefit intrinsically. But if I said Zayd fil bayt, Zayd is in the house, now it has its its meaning is understood. Tamam. Right? Because fi, in, it doesn't have an intrinsic meaning, right? The meaning that it does have applies to something else that's not mentioned yet. Right? In what? Who's in? Right? There's something else that needs to be, that's being ascribed to this, right? This word. Right? So Zayd is in. So the meaning has to do with Zayd, not the word itself. Whereas house, it doesn't need anything else. So how do you know if a word is a noun? Right? There are signs. Right? Everything has signs. Right? And really, everything that is a sign of the greatness of Allah. Everything. Even, and we'll talk about nouns later on, inshallah. Okay, so he says, and we'll read the text because we want throughout this class to actually make a completion of the full text. And there's a blessing in doing so, right, to read the entire text as well, even though we'll translate it as well. Right, so he says, فَالْإِسْمُ يُعْرَفْ بِالْخَفْضِ وَالتَّنْوِينِ وَدُخُولِ الْأَلِفِ وَاللَّامِ وَحُرُوفِ الْخَفْضِ وَهِيَ. Right, we'll take part by part. The noun is known by the following signs. The first sign is al-khafd. In other books, they use the word jar. Jar and khafd mean the same thing. Khafd means something that's lowered. Something that is lowered. Right? It's the opposite of irtifa', something that is raised. Right? So, why did they use it for lowered? Allah knows best. Right? But what is the lowest vowel mark that you can put on a letter? The lowest one. Yeah, the kasra, right? The kasra, yeah. Right, so if that helps you, right, the khafd is kasra because it's makhfood. It's lowered. Right, so, but khafd in Arabic is more expansive than just kasra. And we'll talk about why, because right, when we put vowels on words, there's two ways to know whether a word is of the states of a word. Right? Some you'll know directly by the sign that's there, the fatha, the dhamma, or the kasra. Right? And others you'll know by letters. Right? Right? So khafd, if you see a word that has a kasra on it, an actual kasra, not because of some secondary reason, right, then you know for a fact it's a noun. Because no verbs can have khafd. Right? Any word that you see that has a kasra, an inherent kasra, because be careful, right? What happens when you say قالت البنت, the girl said. قالت, right, ends with a sukun, and البنت starts with a sukun. So if you read the Qur'an, وقالت الملائكة, right, the angels said, it was قالت الملائكة, but because it would be too hard to, as an interruption in the fluidity of the speech, right, we say قالت الملائكة. That kasra is only there for that reason. It's not actually there. Right? The real word has a sukun on it, qalat. Right? But in order to make it fluid and to make it smooth when you read it, they use a kasra. Qalatil malaika. Right? So that's not, right? If you see that, that's different. Right? And plus that ta, that big ta, right, is a sign right, itself for a verb, not a noun. Right, so al-khafd, any word that has a kasra, an actual kasra, right, intrinsically, right, or is in the state of being khafd, right, or majroor, or makhfood, then it is a noun. Right? Don't worry about the states just yet, because we'll talk about them. There's 3 states that any word can be in. Technically 4, if you consider the sukun. The second is a tanween. Now the tanween is an interesting thing because effectively it's a noon. Right? It's a noon that is pronounced but not written. It's pronounced but it's not written. Right? So if you say baytun, right, or fi buyutin adhina Allahu an turfa, right, in houses, buyutin, there's a tanween there. Right? When you see it written, you don't see ba, right, ya, waw, ta, noon. You don't see the noon, right? But it's pronounced as a noon, buyutin, or buyutun, or buyutan, but it's not written. Right? So that sign, right, fulfills the role of a noon. Right? So there's no need to write the noon there. Tamam. Right? So any word that has a tanween, what is it? A noun. Right? So wherever in the Qur'an, inna wa Qur'anan faraqnahu ala an-nas litaqra'uhu ala mukthin. 2 nouns. Qur'anan, mukthin. Right? The third, he says, dukhul al-alif wal-lami. That's, it accepts an alif and a lam. Right? So some of the signs you'll see that the word has it, right? But other signs that it has the ability to accept it. Right? So those will be a little bit more subtle. Right? So if I took the word that we just used, baytun. Baytun is what? A verb, a noun, or a particle? A noun. What's the proof? What's the sign? The tanween. Right? But if I wanted, and if I chose to make baytun, which is a house, if I wanted to make it definite and say the house, I could put alif lam on it instead. Al-bayt. Al-baytu. Right? So even though at the moment it doesn't have an alif lam, but it could accept it at any time. If I wanted to, right, I could put it on there. But I can't say al-qalat. Right? The she said. Right? I can't put an alif lam on a verb. Right? So any word that can accept an alif lam, either it already has the alif lam, right? Alhamdu lillahi. Alhamdu has an alif lam, right? Or it can accept it, right? That would only be a noun. It will be a noun. Right? And the last one, he says, وَحُرُوفِ الْخَفْضِ, it accepts the particles of khafd. Right? We already mentioned that khafd is a state which usually shows up as a kasra. Right? But there are other things that can be khafd. But the reason why a noun would get a kasra or be in the state of being right, makhfood, which we'll talk about in the upcoming lessons, that word is in that state because of something before it that caused it to be in that state. Right? So if I said Alhamdulillahi, right? Why is right, the name of Allah it's a noun, right? Obviously the greatest noun of all time, right? And it has a kasra on it, right? So that's another sign of it having a lam. It has an alif lam as well, right? Right? And it has a kasra. It's a sign of a noun. But what caused it to have a kasra in that situation? Right? So there are reasons for that, and generally there's only one reason, even though right, they break it up into 2. Right? There's only one reason, that a word, a particle that causes khafd that preceded it. In this case, lillahi. Li, because li is there, then the next word gets a kasra. If I said li zaydin, right, or fi baytin, right, these words, these letters, these particles, they are called huruf al-khafd, the particles of khafd, because the word that comes after them will be makhfood. Right? It will be in the state of khafd because of those words. Amongst them, right? And he lists them here. He says wahiya, and they are, and for those who studied in the previous class, hiya is a singular feminine pronoun that is referring back to a non-human plural, huruf. Right? They are, not she is. Right? But these will come up in the class. I'm just trying to pick on the students. So they are min, wa ila, wa an, wa ala, wa fi, wa rubba, wal ba, wal kaf, wal lam, wa hurufin qasam. So just to read the text. He says they are min, which means from. Right? And min is to initiate, right? From, starting from, and ending it to. Right? So from. Ila which means to or till or up to. Right? Wa an is a very beautiful word. Right? An can mean about. An can mean regarding. Right? There's a lot of ways you can translate an. Right? Yasalunaka anil anfal. They ask you regarding the war spoils. Right? An. Right? Anil anfa li. Because anfal is one of the particles that causes the next word to be khafd, right? Makhfud. Right? Anil anfali. So if you see an anywhere in the Quran, and the next word would have to be a noun, and the next word would be makhfud. You can't say an fa'ala, right? An and then a verb. You can't say that. You can't even say an fi, right? An and then the next letter is a particle. You can't say that. So every time you see an, the next word, or any of these letters, the next word is a noun, or a whole sentence for some of them. Right? Wa ala is upon, lil isti'ala, that this is over top of something else. Right? On or upon. It could be abstract, that he is upon good character. Right? It's not a physical on, right? On top of something. Wa fi means in, but it also means regarding. Right? It could also mean for the sake of. Like we say, Barakallahu fika. Right? Fika, that ka is a noun because it comes after fi. Right? Barakallahu fika, may Allah, literally means may Allah bless in you. Right? But it means may Allah bless you regarding you. Right? Or may Allah put blessings in you. Or may Allah put blessings for you. So fi, again, can either be literal or abstract. Right? Wa rubba is a very unique, a word unique really to Arabic. It means many a scholar, right, have studied this book. Rubba aliman qara'a hadha al-kitab. Right? It can mean some. Right? It can mean son. It could mean there's a high likelihood of something. Right? Right, so the Prophet ﷺ, he used rubba in many different hadith. Right? He said, rubba qari al-Qur'ani wal-Qur'anu yal'anu. That it is very likely that a person recites the Qur'an and the Qur'an is cursing them. Right? They read the verse that, and the curse of Allah is on the liars, and they spend their days and nights lying. Right? Right? And there's many hadith like that. Right? رُبَّ سَامِعٍ أَوْعَى مِنَ رُبَّ مُبَلِّغٍ أَوْعَى مِنَ السَّامِعِ. Right? Many people who convey the message understood it better than the one who they heard it from. Right? There's a lot of wisdom in the word rubba. Right? Wal ba is one of my favorites. Ba has 12 meanings, but we're not going to go into that. There's a whole text that goes into these things, but the beauty of the Quran is really in the little letters. And they say that the wisdom of Surah Fatiha is in the ba of Bismillah. That everything is summed up in that one letter. Right? So ba can mean in, it can mean with, and these are the most famous meanings, in or with. Right? So you can say Bismillah in the name of Allah or with the name of Allah. You can translate it both ways. Right? It could mean in exchange for, right? That it's the same way we would say that I bought this candy bar with $5, right? Or we would use for $5, right? But in Arabic you would use the ba, right? Bi khamsa $5. Right? Wal kaf, and the kaf, ka, right? Ka means like, right? Zaydun kal asad. Zayd is like the lion, or like a lion. Right? So ka is for tashbih, for resemblance. This resembles this. Right? And if you want to be really eloquent, you would just say Zaydun asadun. Zayd is a lion. And that's a higher level of eloquence, that you took out the letter of resemblance. Right? So it made the word shorter, but the meaning's greater. Right? Instead of saying that he's like the sun, he's the sun. Right? And when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, they said the full moon has risen over us. They didn't say that Muhammad is like a full moon who has risen. Right? That would be less of an emphasis. Right? So the ka, right? So laysa kamithlihi shay'an, right? Shay'un. Right? Kazaydin, right? The next word will be khafd. Al-makhfud. Wal-lam, we already talked about lam, li, like lillahi, right? That means for. Right? For. And then he says, وَحُرُوفٍ qasam, and the letters of oath. The letters of swearing an oath. Right, so generally the most famous letter of oath is what? What did we read in Maghrib just now? The first surah? Wal-asr. Wal-asri. Right, why is there a kasra? Because that waw is for an oath. Right? Allah swears by the time. Right, but technically there's three letters that you could use. Waw is the most famous. Right? You can say wallahi, I swear by Allah, or you can say billahi, right? I swear by Allah, or you can say tallahi. Right? Tallahi is in Surah Yusuf 3 times. Tallahi laqad atharaka Allahu alayna. Right? I swear by Allah that Allah has definitely given you preference over us, has preferred you over us. The brothers speaking to Yusuf. Right? But the second two, bi and ta, they can only be used with the actual name Allah, whereas you can use waw for anything. Right? You can say wallahi, you can say war-rahmani, you can say war-rahimi, you can say wash-shamsi, wad-duha, right? You can say wad-duha, you can say, use waw for anything, but you can't say tal-duha or tal-asri, you can't say that. Right? Only ta and ba are only used for the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And each of these will have their time in the spotlight as the book continues, but just to shed some light ahead of time on that. Right, so we can break it down really to 4. Right? Some books they add some details, like hatta and other things, but there's a reason why he left those out here. Okay, so the tanween, the baytun, baytin, baytan, right? The alif lam, al baytu, right? The particles of khafd, any of those words like lil bayt or fil bayt or alal bayt, alal bayti, right? Or the particles of oath, wa, ba, or ta. So that covers the nouns, right? As for the verbs, right? We mentioned that a verb is a word that indicates to its own meaning, but it has something to do with time. It is attached to time. So he says, right? So it has to do with one of the 3 tenses. Either it's a past tense, which is called al-madi, for those who are writing. Right, past tense, or al-mudari', which in Arabic is unique because mudari' is present and future tense, right? Or I should say present or future. So any word that is mudari', you could translate it hypothetically in 2 different ways. Right? Inna Allaha wa malaikatu yusalluna ala nabi. Right? Verily Allah and His angels are sending blessings on the Prophet. You can translate it as are, right? Or technically you could translate it as in the future. They will. Right? But the scholars, they understood from the reason why Allah used mudari' in this verse is that it means that He is and always will. Right? So that's where the depth of Qur'an is being understood, even from the first chapters of the science. Right? Right? So the verb either has to do with past tense, right? إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ, right? Or that's a bad example. Right? رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ, Allah is pleased with them. رضي. Right? Or it can be مضارع, which is either present or future tense according to the context. Right? إلا الذين, what's a good example of that? Right? الذين يؤمنون بالغيب, those who believe in the unseen. Right? They believe at the moment. Right? Right? Other places Allah says آمنوا, they believed. Right? Past tense. Right? So مضارع, so you can say يصدق زيد, Zayd is telling the truth, or you can translate it, Zayd will tell the truth. Right? And the context will tell you which one is intended. And then the third tense is a command. Right? And command is a type of verb which indicates to an occurrence that is being sought. That you're seeking some sort of thing to happen. You're seeking something to happen after the sentence itself that was said. Right? If I said sit down, am I expecting you to do it before I said those words? No. Right? The expectation is after the statement. Right? So command technically could be a positive command or a negative command. So that's why you'll see in other books that they add a fourth category, the negative command, the nahi. Right? But if I said don't sit, that's a type of command. Right? That's a type of command in itself. Right? So he says the signs of nouns, the signs of verbs. Right? How do you know that a word is a verb? Right? One, you can, right? The stronger your vocab becomes, the more that you'll intrinsically just know that's a verb because of the vocab. Right? And if you know what like for instance, if you know what the word pear means in Arabic, al-kum wa thara, right? When you see kum wa thara, you won't be looking in the dictionary at the verb section, right? Because you'll know it already. Right? Nobody goes in the dictionary and looks up Allah, because they know it. Right? And the more words you know, right, the freer you become, right? Even though in the beginning, your best friend should be your dictionary. Even till this day, I still use the dictionary. Right? So he says that the verb is known by its signs, which are قد. Right? The word قد. قد سمع الله قول التي. Right? قد كفر الذين قالوا إن الله ثالث ثلاثة. Right? قد, any word that comes after قد is a verb. Right? قد is only used for verbs. And depending on the tense of that verb, the meaning of qad is very beautiful. Right? So if qad is used for a past tense word, right? Qad sami Allah. Alright, we just said just now, qad aqamat as-salat. Right? Then it means a tahqiq, that emphasis. That thing has definitely happened. Right? Or it could mean, right, that it's about to happen. Right? Or it's about to happen. Right? So if somebody came and said, "Where's Zayd? Qad kharaj." He just left. Right? Look how just one extra word. You know what kharaja means? He left. Right? Once we learn the verbs as we go. Right? You know kharaja means he left, but you want to say he just left. Because when we're speaking our native tongue, right, we have these nuanced meanings that give color and give beauty to the meanings. We could say he just left. He's about to leave. So how do we do that in Arabic? Words like this, the huruf, the particles. And the particles change and beautify the statements. Right, so if I said qad kharaj, right, either he definitely left or he just left. Right? But that's if you use qad with a past tense verb. Right? If you use qad with a present tense verb, right, it has the meaning of sometimes. Sometimes. Right, so you'll see statements like, for instance, قَدْ يَنْصَحُكَ الشَّيْطَانِ. Sometimes shaitan gives you good advice. Right? Right? Imam Busayri says that, وَإِنَّ صَحَكَ فَاتَّهِمِي. Right? If the nafs or your ego gives you advice, then just assume it's wrong. Right? But قَدْ يَصْدُقُ الْكَاذِبُ. Right? Sometimes the liar, it tells the truth. قَدْ يَصْدُقُ. Right? Yasduqu means he is telling the truth or he will tell the truth. Right? قَدْ يَصْدُقُ means sometimes he tells the truth. Right? قَدْ يَصْدُقُ الْكَاذِبُ. Sometimes the liar tells the truth. Right? Sometimes a lazy person gets rich. Does it happen a lot? No. Right? Right? So that's the first sign, قَدْ qad. So as we take these classes, we should have a daily reading of the Qur'an, even if it's a little bit, but keep in mind these meanings. Right? Look for qad, look for the huruf of, right? Look for the particles of khaft, look for the ba and the waw and the li and the ala. Right? Look for them and find them, and then see if you can put two and two together and make some meaning. Right? The next sign is sofa, right? Not the thing that I'm sitting on, right? But sofa in Arabic, it means eventually. Right? So, and then we'll use this and the one after it, seen, right? Meaning the letter seen, but when we use it in Arabic, we say sa. Right? Right? Sayaf'alu, sayakunu, sayaqulu sufaha, Allah says in the Quran. Right? So sa or sofa are added to verbs, but they're only added to the present tense verbs, right? The mudari'. Right? You'll never see a past tense verb with a sa, right? This sa or a sofa before it. Right? So you say sofa ta'lamun, thumma kalla sofa ta'lamun. Right? Sofa ta'lamun, you will eventually know. Right? So seen and sofa both indicate to some meaning in the future, right? That there is going to be. Right? So the mudari', which originally had the two possibilities of being present tense or future tense, if there's a seen or a sofa on it, the first possibility is gone. It's only future tense that remains. Right? So if you say, right, sayaqulu sufaha, right, the fools will soon say. You can't translate it as that they are saying, because that present tense meaning no longer applies because of the seen or the sofa. Right? Sofa, they actually made a noun from the word sofa called taswif. Taswif is what you say for procrastination. It means procrastination, because a person who procrastinates says sofa. Sofa af'al. I will do it eventually. Right? Sofa af'al. I will do it eventually. Right? So anytime you see sofa in the Quran, right, again that means eventually. Right? Sofa ta'lamun. You will eventually see. Kalla. Indeed. Sofa ta'lamun. You will see. Right? You will soon see. Right? So the difference between seen, the saya'lamun, right, sata'lamun, and sofa ta'lamun, is that sofa is a further distance away. Right? So you would say soon or eventually in English. Right? So I said, sa'af'alu wajib al-bayt. Right? Right? I'll do my homework soon. Right? Sofa af'al wajib al-bayt, don't believe the child. Right? Right? I'll do it eventually. Right? Don't believe them. And then the last sign is it's a long name, ta ut ta'nith as-sakina. It's the ta of feminine that has a sukoon on it. Right? So no noun will have a ta that's open, a big ta, and has a sukoon on it. Right? You may see a noun with a big ta, but not with a sukoon. Right? وَامْرَأَةُ فِرْعَوْنَ وَامْرَأَةُ لُوط. If you look in the Quran, it's written with a big ta, not a small one. Even though other places, وَامْرَأَتُهُ عَاقِرَةٌ, right? وَكَانَتْ إِمْرَأَتِي عَاقِرَةٌ, you see the small ta. Right? But if it has a big ta and a sukoon, it's a verb. قَالَتْ الْمَلَائِكَةُ, right? وَكَفَرَتْ بِأَنْعُمِ اللَّهِ. كَفَرَتْ, right? They were ungrateful. Right? So any word, right? The reason is because that ta is a sign of a past tense verb. Right? So if you want to say that she did something, you would say فعلت, خرجت, دخلت, صدقت, right? كفرت, right? قرأت. Right? So those are the four signs that they give here. Right? Right? قد, sa, sofa, and ta. At. Right, which brings us to the final type, which is the harf. Right, we mentioned the harf is a particle. It's a word that does not give its own intrinsic meaning, right, but its meaning is understood by its connection to either verbs and nouns, to verbs and nouns. Right, so the harf, the signs of a harf, how do you tell the word is a harf? Very easy. Right? None of the signs of the noun apply, none of the signs of the verbs apply. What's left? Process of elimination. It's got to be a harf. Right, so if you're reading the Quran, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ الْأَنْفَالِ, they're asking you about, right? So you go through it. Yas'alunak, or yas'aluna, right? That's a verb, right? Ka, right? That's a noun, right? An, wait, there's no alif lam, there's no tanween, there's no harf before it, right? It doesn't have seen, it doesn't have sofa, it doesn't have qads. It's got to be a particle, right? It's got none of the previous proofs. So he says the particle is that which does not have any of the signs of the noun or the verb. Doesn't have any of the signs of the noun or the verb. Right? That right there is the opening chapters, right, of Matn Al-Ajurrumiyya, and we're going to space it out that we can finish the entire book, right, in the 12 weeks. We don't want to rush it, because once it becomes just a mountain of words and terms, then it becomes hard. From the beginning, if we can make a strong resolve to make flashcards, to memorize the terms. Memorize ism is noun, right? And then stop saying noun, just use ism. Right? Verb is fi'al. Then take the word verb and put it somewhere safe, because you might use it for English grammar. Right? But right? And then try to learn. Okay, what are the harf, the particles of khaft? Ba, ta, kaf, lam, wal, mud, right? And so forth. And if we start from the beginning, we have a whole week to practice. And then as we read the Qur'an, or if we read hadith at home with the family, right, then we can, okay, that must be a particle, that must be a noun, that must be this. And then inshallah, in upcoming classes, we'll show those who have not learned it yet how to use the dictionary, right? And then really it's an ocean. You are more than welcome to dive in, right? And you won't drown, maybe. But there's lifeboats all over the place. There is an amazing commentary on this book, which since the first day I heard about it from Sayyidina Shaykh Faraz, Hafidhahullah, may Allah preserve him. It's by a great scholar named Ahmad ibn Ajiba, and he is known for his exegesis of the Qur'an. Amazing tafsir. And his tafsir is very unique because it's called a tafsir al-ishari. It's an indicative exegesis, where he points towards certain subtle meanings that are found if you really reflected on the verses. Right? And because of his, not only his knowledge, but also his piety, right, his words are beautiful. So he has a commentary on this book. Right? It's strange that a person of such knowledge would have a commentary on a primer of Arabic grammar. And he does the same style in this as he did in that tafsir. That he indicates to spiritual meanings that can be found in the most mundane of subjects. Even though Nahw is like cranberry juice. Either you love it or you hate it. Right? Even if you hate it, you should love it somewhat, because I don't think any believer hates Arabic. They just might not find it particularly entertaining. Right? So he says that, let me just find it for a second. He says the types of speech, kalam, that a slave can use to draw nearer to his master are 3 types, similar to what we've taken. He says the first, ism, fi'al, and harf. Those are the 3 types. Ism, we said before, also means noun, means name. Right? So he says the ism, that the first means that a slave can draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is by Allah's name. Right? Allah. Right? The unique name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is Allah. Right? And he says that this is the greatest name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ism al-A'zam. Ism Allahi al-A'zam. And he says, he mentions the verse, right? وَاذْكُرْ إِسْمَ رَبِّكَ. Mention the name of your Lord. Right? وَتَبَتَّلْ إِلَيْهِ تَبْتِيلًا. And cut off all things except for your devotion to Him. Right? Cut off all goals, put everything aside except for your direction to Him. So he says that this unique name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the sultan of all names. It's the king of all names. And he says, so this the one who is seeking Allah, seeking a relationship with Allah, right, will continue to mention that name on his tongue or her tongue, and be engrossed in its mentioning until it becomes enveloped in his flesh and his blood, and the lights of that name begin to flow through their entire essence until they find a communion with Allah. So then the remembrance of that name goes from being on the tongue to being in the heart, and then from being in the heart to being in the soul, and from being in the soul to being in the deepest essence. The second type is the fi'l, the verb, right, which also means action or occurrence. And he says that it is the struggle that we make against ourselves, that we strive against our lower desires, our egos, right, by breaking off that which it has become accustomed to. Our lower selves have become accustomed to a lot of things that are holding us back. So the fi'l, the second type, is that we break off those things. And he quotes one of the great scholars, كيف تخرق لك العوائد وأنت لم تخرق في نفسك العوائد. It's really tough to translate. Right? How can customs be broken for you if you can't even break the customs of your own self? Right, so he says the things that we've become accustomed to, that we've become accustomed to talking a lot, so we should break it by being silent more often. Right? And we've become accustomed to lots of sleep, so we should break it by waking up early in the nights and worshipping Allah. Right? And food, we should break it with hunger and fasting, right? And so forth. And then the harf, right, which means at-taraf, right, to be on the verge of something. He says that it means true aspiration and drive. Right? It's to seek that communion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seek that relationship with Allah. And he says that the beginning of the harf, the beginning of that, right, that starting from that, right, with that aspiration, it starts with aspiration and it ends with that communion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he continues and continues and continues. It's like there's more of this than actual commentary on the book. Right, so I thought that was beneficial. Maybe we'll share a little bit as time. Later classes we probably won't have a lot of time to do it. We want to leave some time if anyone has any questions, whether it be about what we covered or about what's to come on the course. See? Small ta and the big ta. Yeah. I wonder if there's a way I can show you. Our technical coordinator is not here. Got an idea. See how big I can write. So the question was about, say that again? Sorry. Yeah, so right, so can everybody see that? Yes. Is that too small? Right, so verbs, they have this ta, but it has a sukoon on it, right? Even if you see sometimes there's a kasra because it needs to join the next word, but that kasra is just ignore it, right? It's actually a sukoon, but in order to make it flow, they read it with a kasra, right? So only verbs get this ta. So if you see a ta like this with a sukoon, right, it's not a noun. It has to be a verb, right? But there are other ta that are not signs of a verb, like you have, if I make it bigger, that type of ta. Right, ta al-marbuta, it literally means the tied off ta. It's like a little knot. Right. So that, anytime you see that, that's a noun. Right? They didn't add it in the signs of the noun, but this is most definitely a sign of a noun. because generally a word would either have an alif lam or a tanween, even if it had a ta. Imra'atun. So what's the need for saying that the ta is a sign? It already has a tanween. Right? Or al-imra'atu, it already has an alif lam. Right? But the ta itself only happens on the nouns. Right? But you see sometime in the Qur'an, and there's reasons why it's written. Right? You'll see a word like imra'ah, right? Which is, I'll just write the original. Originally it's written like this. Originally imra'ah is written like the top one. Can everyone see? Right. But sometimes in the Quran it's written as the bottom one with the bigger ta. And there's a reason. Even the way that the Quran is written is also preserved. Right. The rasm al-khat, the way that it was, right, ever since the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and fully compiled by Uthman ibn Affan with the exact writing, right, that encompasses all of the variant readings. And so in the Quran, you'll see that Maliki Yawmiddin is written with a mim, lam, kaf. But then there's an alif, little kari zabr, right, the standing alif on it, because Maliki, but it also allows for Maliki, which is another valid reading. So that ta does not have a sukoon on it. The second one, it doesn't have a sukoon. So it's not a verb, right? It's a noun. Right? Or if it was a verb, it would have a sukoon. Or it wouldn't have that ta. It'd be a different version. Does that answer the question? So, all right. Any other questions? So we'll close there, inshallah. And next week we'll talk about al-i'rab. They translated as inflection. My English grammar terminologies are not as good, so I'm just going to trust them that it means inflection, right? But when we talked about that a word is makhfood, right, that it has a kasra on it, that's a type of i'rab. That's a type of inflection. There's 3 types, right? Technically 4, depending on the noun or verb, and that's what we'll talk about next week. So we'll add that on top of this class, right? But we do have some takeaway papers, so as practice for what we've done. So I'll print those out, inshallah, before everyone. Let me take this off so you don't have to. How many people do we have? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 8. Brother Majid, your mother is coming back? Okay, so 9. Say 10. So I'm not going to use the word homework, but some speech is without utterance. The funny thing is that homework in Arabic is wajib al-bayt, and wajib means obligatory in Arabic, the obligation of the home. Can you see if it's printing?
Is there a text where they have examples of what we just discussed, for example?
Sure. There are.
The Quran.
Yeah, there are. There's a book called Tuhfa as-Saniyya. It's translated. So it has the text that we're doing, and it has a commentary on it. Right? Most of what we're doing here is just taking from that. But if you could get the copy, right, it has in its practices.
What is it called?
Tuhfa as-Saniyya. I'd have to. Yeah, if I can just. I don't have the PDF. I have the actual book, but they might have a PDF. Yeah, so let me see if it just comes up on the.
There is a question on
What's the question?
as we go along, will you provide the vocabulary to memorize?
Vocabulary to memorize? Yeah. Some of the vocabulary we'll have in the class, like the terms that we have. But we're going to try to plan out next week a way to improve one's vocabulary, how to arrange your notebook, how to look up words throughout the future classes. And the goal is to do at least 3 words a day. And 3 words a day, 5 days a week, 2 days to revise. Try to memorize 3 words a day, right? Which a mixture of verbs and nouns. The particles, you can memorize all of them, it's just one small list. Right? That's not a big deal. But the verbs and the nouns. And then once we go over how to use the dictionary, then whatever you see, you walk down the street and you see some sign that has Arabic words, right? Not Farsi or Urdu because it looks similar. Right? But if you find a sign that says Arabic, you want to know what that restaurant sells. Right? It says maqha. Right? Okay, what's qahwa mean? Coffee. Okay. Maqha, cafe. Right? If you know how to use the dictionary, then there's nothing that you can see that you won't be able to have. If you don't know it, you'll be able to find out by yourself without being in need of the help. There's a translation. Yeah, so we'll try to find it and then send it through the. If anyone hasn't registered, then you can just give your email they have at the front counter. So, at the front counter, because any announcements for the class or any work or any supplementary reading or anything, we can give it through that. It'll go straight to your email, inshallah. وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم الحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم الله خيرا. I believe they are passing out the unspoken piece of paper. Inshallah. You have a whole week. You can do 1 question a day. It's not hard. It just looks long. If you look at the actual text, we covered a lot today. Because the text is quite small.